tonight. Revolt in the Philippines. The U.S. military's new front line. And the body-slammed reporter speaks.
It's not about me. This is about freedom of the press.
A Pentagon investigation acknowledged that an American airstrike killed 105 civilians in Mosul, but placed much of the blame on Islamic State fighters for rigging the targeted building with explosives. The U.S. military claims the March 17th airstrike was meant to kill 2 ISIS snipers and destroy only the top floor of the building. But critics say the United States has a record of launching airstrikes in crowded cities without taking the necessary precautions. Manchester police have made what they call significant arrests in the investigation into the network behind Monday's concert bombing. Investigators also found, quote, very important items while searching several homes. Authorities there abruptly stopped sharing information about the attack with their U.S. counterparts yesterday, citing leaks to the media, but resumed this afternoon. President Trump asked the Department of Justice to launch a review into the leaks and assured the UK they won't continue. Another federal court has ruled against President Trump's travel ban. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals today affirmed a Maryland judge's block on the order. Chief Judge Roger Gregory wrote that the ban, quote, drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. The issue could now head to the Supreme Court. 22 Republican senators, including Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, sent Trump a letter pressing him to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. They say the agreement would provide legal grounds to reinstate strict environmental regulations that Trump has already overturned, like the Clean Power Plan. A California-based company launched a 3D printed rocket into space from a private launch pad for the first time. Rocket Labs hopes to begin sending commercial satellites into space later this year. It was also the first ever launch for New Zealand, whose government recently created a space agency in hopes of entering the commercial space race. Today, the leaders of the 28 countries that make up the NATO alliance met in Brussels. But the United States, usually the linchpin of these once-a-year summits, was a wild card. At the meeting, President Trump repeated his familiar refrain that NATO members are mooching off the U.S.
23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense.
Trump campaigned on a platform of skepticism about American involvement overseas, but since taking office, he's actually expanded America's military commitments around the world. Trump has almost doubled the U.S. presence in Syria, sending 450 Army Rangers and Marines to support the force of 500 Special Operations soldiers already on the ground. He's deployed at least one carrier strike group to the waters off the Korean Peninsula. And Trump is considering sending another 5,000 troops to Afghanistan, where 8,400 are currently serving, a potential personnel increase of nearly 60%. He's also inherited a sprawling web of covert military operations in Africa. Military documents recently obtained by Vice News describe 1,700 commandos carrying out 96 missions in 20 different countries on any given day as of last October. And those numbers are likely to increase under Trump. But one of the largest new fronts is in Europe itself. Thousands of troops have massed on the eastern border with Russia, especially in Romania, where U.S. Army tanks are being repainted from desert camo to forest green, as the military reorients towards a new but familiar threat.
Over the course of the 20th century, Romania was occupied by the Germans, then bombed by the Americans, then occupied by the Russians, then liberated through revolution. Today, Romania has become one of America's staunchest NATO allies, and it's playing a key role in a new U.S. mission in Eastern Europe. But this mission is not about NATO. It's an independent, American display of force.
Operation Atlantic Resolve is the largest military buildup in Europe since the end of the Cold War.
87 U.S. battle tanks, 144 Bradley fighting vehicles, and 6,500 U.S. soldiers have rolled into Eastern Europe. The last time this division came to Europe, it was D-Day.
Deterrence is lethality plus presence. The only thing harder out here than trying to work with partners and trying to do all this with another military and integrate other pieces of equipment is doing that by yourself, doing that alone, doing that without a coalition, doing that without NATO.
American troops are not just in Romania, but all across what the military calls the Eastern Flank, a term usually reserved for an active front line.
This is not a counterinsurgency fight. This is a heavy conventional type threat, not something that the U.S. has practiced a lot of in the past decade and a half or so. And so, of course, many would draw a lot of conclusions as to far as, well, what are you deterring?
While on the ground, U.S. troops remain coy about the R word, Russia. But the endgame is obvious. Officially, the deployment's mandate is to promote stability in the region, 3 years after Russia's 2014 intervention in Ukraine. The increased presence of U.S. troops has not gone unnoticed by both Russia, which has voiced concern about a third party building up its military presence near their borders, and in the local Romanian community, just across the sea from Crimea, where U.S. troops join residents for a charity run along their beaches.
Nu fie, eu zic că e exact sentimentul ăla de siguranță că nu ești singur.
În caz de ceva.
În caz de orice, da.
Să rămânem noi aici unde suntem, că nici noi nu mergem peste alții.
Americanii sunt deja aici.
Sunt aici, acum sunt ca prieteni. Probabil că și rușii au fost o perioadă pe aici, nu? Dacă vin cu gânduri pașnice, nu cred că e problema asta.
M-a bucurat că au venit și că suntem susținuți într-o anumită măsură. Dacă vor să ne ocupe, ne ocupă fără doar și poate. Dacă vor neapărat, dacă e să se bazeze pe forță și ceea ce privește. Cred că e doar un joc politic, așa, propaganda.
Either way, the Romanians are ready. At the MK Air Base near the town of Constanța, Romanian fighter pilot Colonel Daniel Tomcat Moise is training with his American counterparts.
I saw that movie.
Which one?
Black Hawk Down.
That's not a good movie to watch
I
before
don't
you
know.
go fly.
I think it's very, refreshing for you. The reality is not like in the games,
Never is.
Yeah. Looking on the map, we are at the eastern border of NATO. It's not eastern border of Romania. This is the very last point for NATO airspace. Have you seen Game of Thrones? My personal feeling is like I'm like Jon Snow, My sacred duty is you shall not pass this line, And we are ready for that.
But in an era when adversaries like Russia have perfected warfare by other means, propaganda and hacking and unofficial armies of little green men, large forces of troops and tanks might come off as old-fashioned, more circus than security.
I think for those that would say that it's probably outdated and a bit antiquated to train to that method, that's probably a good thing because I think the old saying is if you want peace, then you must prepare for war.
Romania understands that well. They've seen all this before. 87-year-old Captain Florin Ciobanu joined the Romanian Air Force as a pilot in 1952, at the height of the Soviet occupation of Romania.
Peste noi au venit toți peste noi, da.
Americani au venit, rușii.
Da, au venit toți, da. Și vin, și poate cine știe, Doamne ferește, să vină și alții, da. Nu, la ora actuală, cum este împărțită lumea, e mai greu ca să poate să ne ocupe pe noi rușii, să zicem așa, sau să vină la noi. E foarte greu. Foarte greu, probabil sunt armate, s-au făcut, cum îi zice, cercul ăsta posibil cu Polonia, cu Lituania, cu tot, într-adevăr, unde este o stabilă destul de puternică și nu-i convine, nici rusului nu convine treaba asta.
Whether the U.S. presence is propaganda, posturing, or practice, Operation Atlantic Resolve currently has no end date. American troops look set to remain in Eastern Europe indefinitely.
The Philippine island of Mindanao is home to about 25 million people, and today it was engulfed in open battle. ISIS-linked militants are trying to seize control of the majority Muslim city of Marawi, taking hostages, burning buildings, and raising the ISIS flag. The government characterized the resistance as a few desperate holdouts, but explosions and gunfire could be heard across the city. Army tanks moved to secure parts of town, and helicopters strafed jihadist-held areas and evacuated the wounded. Mindanao is notorious for violent separatism. The violence began when the army raided one of the hideouts used by the jihadist group Abu Sayyaf. In response, about 100 gunmen stormed the city. The death toll has risen to at least 20, with many more injured. President Rodrigo Duterte had already declared martial law on the island, and as fighting escalated on Wednesday, he hinted at a broader crackdown.
I might declare martial law throughout the country to protect the people.
Duterte's threat raised concern because of his authoritarian approach to law enforcement. At his direction, police and vigilantes have executed more than 8,000 people accused of participating in the drug trade.
In this oath of office, which I promise to God and to the people, that I will protect and defend the country. If I think that you should die, you will die. If you fight us, you will die. If there's an open defiance, you will die. And if it means many people dying, so be it.
The ongoing violence around Marawi has forced thousands to evacuate and take shelter in neighboring communities. Vice News spoke with Joseph Ajero, a professor at Mindanao State University, who fled Marawi City this morning.
When the gunfight erupted, we had to stop. We had to shut down the college. We told the students you need to go home. You need to get out of this place as fast as you can. But we just couldn't. It was too late for us to get out. There was a school that was burned down, a hospital. The government forces are already on offensive mode. They're already doing airstrikes, heavy artillery, and crossfire. There were already more buildings were already burned in Marawi City. I think martial law being imposed in Marawi City is the next best thing that we need right now. But I'm scared for the entire Philippines. I'm afraid if this cannot be contained within a few more days, and then President Duterte declaring martial law throughout the entire country, that's something that I cannot agree with. That's something that I cannot agree with.
Today, voters in Montana went to the polls to choose a replacement for the state's solitary House seat, which has been empty since Ryan Zinke was confirmed as Secretary of the Interior. What was already a quirky campaign, pitting folk-singing Democrat Rob Quist
We can never be truly free
against Republican Greg Gianforte, took a turn for the sinister yesterday when this happened.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last time that came here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here.
Guardian reporter Ben Jacobs confronted Gianforte about the GOP healthcare bill, and Gianforte attacked him with a now infamous body slam. Evan McMorris Santoro spoke to Jacobs via Skype from Montana.
Now, viewers should know that we actually know each other and we kind of like each other. It's probably good to get that out of the way in the beginning. Gianforte's campaign said that you entered this private office where he was conducting the interview. You were basically, like acting like a jerk, essentially. They say aggressive, and you wouldn't stop when they asked you to. Is that fair?
No, that's incorrect. I mean, their entire statement was riddled with falsehoods, that it wasn't a private office. It was an open space, that there wasn't, a door that I pushed through or crawled through a window, and that it was just joining in and asking a question of, at an event for a candidate for office, of the candidate for office. This was a public event. This was something they advised that I was attending.
And Gianforte's campaign has dismissed you as a liberal journalist. Now, Republicans run against the press basically all the time these days, but now one is specifically running against you. What does that mean to you?
It's not about me. This is about freedom of the press. This is about the First Amendment. This is about reporters being able to ask basic policy questions of candidates on important issues of the day, and be able to expect to not get violently assaulted in the course of doing that.
Do you think that what we saw from Gianforte, his behavior, was in part anything that we can attribute to the way politics are now, maybe in part to the way that Trump ran his campaign?
That I've never faced physical assault interviewing Donald Trump, covering the Trump campaign, dealing with Trump campaign persons. There's certainly been some issues around that campaign, but everyone's responsible for their own actions.
We asked Gianforte for an interview, but we got no response. The timing of this thing is really wild. Hours before the polls opened, Gianforte's altercation with Ben Jacobs changed the entire conversation about this election. Newspapers that had endorsed Gianforte canceled their endorsements. Democrats launched a digital ad specifically about the altercation and reminded voters that polls close at 8 p.m. A lot of people really want this moment to change this election. But people in Montana like to vote by mail. It's a pretty big state, and a significant number of votes have already been cast in this election. There are 699,498 registered voters in Montana. And by yesterday afternoon, before Body Slam Gate, more than 259,000 of them had already sent in their ballot. So more than a third of potential voters had already made up their minds, and they can't change them. We even called the Montana Secretary of State to see if people were trying to change their votes. They told us the only ones calling were reporters asking that dumb question. Before all this happened, the dynamics of this election favored a win by Gianforte. Democrats will tell you that the fact we're talking about Montana at all is a win for them. It's another special election that's close because voters are energized against Trump, they say. But close and winning are not the same thing. So assuming Gianforte wins, does he get to be a respectable member of the Republican caucus in Congress? Paul Ryan weighed in today.
The choice will be made by the people of Montana. I do not think this is acceptable behavior, but the choice will be made by the people of Montana.
And it's not like members of Congress haven't been aggressive before while in Congress.
Let me be clear to you. You have to do that to me again, I'll throw you off.
Oh, whoa.
Who are you?
So Gianforte could fit right in.
This week, 67 students at Middlebury College in Vermont were disciplined for shutting down a campus talk by conservative author Charles Murray. It's the latest in a running battle between liberal student groups and right-wing provocateurs. And it raises a key question. Should freedom of speech protect the protester or the speaker?
That is completely off subject. We're not going to go there.
Well, there's a privilege resolution. If I may just question, I'll make it. No.
Here in Wisconsin's State House, when it comes to debating free speech, there's nothing legislators love more than the sound of their own voice.
So I think that's what they call political grandstanding. I wish I had stopped you earlier because you were completely off the subject of that. That had nothing to do with free speech whatsoever. And I'm very disappointed that after I asked you to stay on subject, that you failed to do that.
The political catfighting is in response to Republican Representative Jesse Cramer's free speech bill, which would radically overhaul how expression at the state's public universities is governed.
Every freshman coming in, and as Representative Baldwin brought up, every person that transfers over potentially should be educated on what the First Amendment is about, because a lot of these kids coming into college don't know what it's about. They've been coddled their entire lives.
How acute is the problem of free speech and repression of free speech here in Wisconsin?
A lot of the legislation that I work on is proactive. We haven't gotten to that point in Wisconsin that we've had someone that is not allowed to speak. We don't want to get to that point.
Cramer's bill does a few things. It forces colleges to establish a free speech board and remain neutral on public policy controversies. Colleges can be fined for shielding students from speakers they find deeply offensive. And student protesters who interfere with the speech of others by, say, drowning out a speaker from being able to deliver a speech could be fined and even expelled. Violent, abusive, indecent, profane, boisterous, obscene, unreasonably loud, or other disorderly conduct that interferes with the free expression of others.
So the big key there is that interferes with the free expression of others. That statement in there means that this is just an aspirational list of things that we've just decided to throw in there.
How are you going to not only define what interferes is, how would you suggest that the University of Wisconsin system actually polices interference?
If you get accused of interfering materially and substantially disrupting someone's free expression, free speech, you will go through the hearing process. If you're found guilty of it, that's where we're going to decide what that ultimately means.
UW-Madison sociology major Savian Castro took time out from finals to testify against the bill.
This bill limits my First Amendment right to object to harmful ideas.
He's one of over 170,000 students Kramer's bill would affect. Do you feel heard in this process?
It took me 5 hours to testify today. I'm a black kid at a predominantly white institution. I have to deal with people saying the N-word at bars every night, and I have to withstand it. We all have to deal with our own adversity, and if someone is having their speaking fees covered, they should be able to withstand some protests at their events, especially when they say incendiary things.
It's not just students in Wisconsin facing new restrictions on how they can protest. California, Michigan, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Virginia have all introduced similar bills, and most have seen campus protests make headlines. All of these bills are a replica of one model proposal from conservative think tank, the Goldwater Institute. Jonathan Butcher is one of the authors.
Let's take, for example, the Charles Murray incident at Middlebury, where students got up and were so loud. And there was so much disturbance and chanting that he could not be heard. And then, of course, what happened afterwards when the professor that he was with, was injured. And that.
So injuries and violence, I think that everyone agrees, that you can't commit an act of violence against somebody. We already have those laws in place. We also already have a law on the books that's called the First Amendment. Why do we need more laws around free speech?
Well, I think this is an avenue to protect free speech because it's not being done in a satisfactory way on campuses now.
I think this is just a bunch of nonsense. I think this is a bunch of Republicans and right-wingers who want to quell free speech on campus. They are doing exactly what they are accusing the other side of doing. One Wisconsin Now.
Scott Ross, the executive director of a progressive advocacy group, is fighting to kill the Goldwater bill. The phenomenon exists though, right? Conservative speakers are being shouted down, drowned out when they're coming to college campuses.
Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo.
Is it boohoo though? It's boohoo now, right? Because, it's against a side or political spectrum that you find abhorrent.
When the government comes in and says you have to create laws that expel students for offering their opinion, even if it's loud, that's a prior restraint, and that is a violation of the Constitution, in my opinion.
But what counts as a violation of free speech tends to oscillate depending on who's doing the talking.
But when he shouts and shouts and shouts and tries to deny to the majority the right to listen, then I think you ought to stop it.
What's being said.
The ringleaders should have been taken by the scruff of the neck and thrown out of the university once and for all.
And which side feels like they're being harmed.
I don't agree that when you become students at colleges, have to be coddled and protected from different points of view.
Liberal students form the majority of voices on college campuses. So it's no surprise the students the Goldwater bill is most likely to protect are conservatives. Isn't this legislation really just you trying to readdress the balance a bit to move things from the left and bring it back a bit more towards the right?
We would be engaged on this regardless of the speakers or the positions that they were bringing on campus.
You'd introduce this legislation if it was all left-wing speakers?
Absolutely would. Absolutely would, because at some point it would change.
Actually being enforced and utilized, that's why in this
There's no way to know?
Well, can I finish?
Yeah, but
you want to interrupt me.
Comic-Con is universal. The performances, the displays, the cosplayers, the lithe, sexualized, vengeance-seeking warrior nymphs. This is Latifah, and at any other Comic-Con, she'd be just another Lara Croft knockoff. But this Comic-Con was the first ever held in Saudi Arabia, one of the most gender-segregated countries in the world. So Latifa and the Bedouin Blade is more than just a veiled heroine with a talking sword.
This is not the Arabia that you think you know. The veil means something different here.
Latifa was designed by Fahad bin Faisal Al Saud, a Stanford grad who helped launch Facebook in Arabic. He's also one of several thousand Saudi princes.
Growing up in Saudi Arabia, my only experience in reaching out to the world was comic books and television or movies. So that way I got to learn about the diversities within American culture. If I can do the same with my content, then I hope women from the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, and anywhere can learn more about our community, but also allow them to get what they want out of it.
Prince Fahad runs New Arab Media, which aspires to be a blend of Marvel Comics and the Lean In Foundation. Latifa's part of the Saudi Girls Revolution comic book series.
It's a universe that's going to be predominantly led by female protagonists. And the purpose behind it is reimagining the world 100 years from now and discussing social issues through art. And I think this is something that is needed within the Arab world because of how marginalized our women are.
Prince Fahad has means most comic book fans don't, so he hired American screenwriter Stan Berkowitz and Sudanese-British editor Razan Ahmed to help achieve his vision.
In our comic, Latifa is almost like the man with no name from the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. Is she an example of modern Muslim women? Is she simply a loner living in a different world? I think it's better that we let the readers decide exactly who she is and what she represents.
Growing up, I had She-Ra, Transformers, Care Bears. They were kind of my heroes, I guess, when I was growing up, but they didn't look like me. I feel that what we have created within a fantasy universe can be translated into the real world through inspiration.
But even inspiration needs permission in Saudi Arabia, and the government's been slow to give its blessing. It took several months, but the Ministry of Culture and Information has finally given the green light for Latifa to be sold in stores. No word yet on when it'll hit the shelves.
There's enough of us that are tired of what's going on, and we're doing whatever we have to utilize whatever resources we have to put a dent in what has been accepted as the norm. I understand that they must take a whole, population of, millions and millions of people into consideration to make sure they move and progress where progress doesn't cause conflict. But that's why I do what I do. We're warming the seat up for when the government decides to get there, it's already ready.
That's Vice News Tonight for Thursday, May 25th. We'll be back on Tuesday.